We are just 1 year out from the 2024 election. We're here today to talk about what we're seeing in the political landscape, how that is starting to shape up, and give you a little bit of a look at how the Galvanize Action and my super PAC, the One for All Committee, are what our plans are for next year. As we're getting started, I want to let you know that we had a webinar last month. An anonymous donor put up a 25K match, which we met. And one of our long-term time donors and a fabulous advocate for justice in her own right, Roberta Riley, was inspired by that match. And so we have another 25K match for today's event. So Roberta is going to match every donation we receive in the next 24 hours up to $25,000. It's such a great way to maximize giving at every level. So I just want to really thank Roberta for her generosity and say, like, if you want to be the next person to do a 25K match, don't hold back. I'm here for you. Just let us know and we will hook you up. All right, let's get started. Today, I want you to remember the number 44. Later on, if you're like, what was that number? Just think about Obama, the 44th president of the United States. Think about hope, okay? 44 is our number. In addition to Obama love, 44 is relevant for us today for 3 reasons. Number one, that number changed our fate in 2020. Think back to 2020. Trump was president. We were in the middle of COVID. Biden was running to save our democracy and try to get America on track. In that race, only 44,000 votes separated Biden from an electoral tie with Trump. Just imagine what that would have meant for our democracy if instead of a clear victory, we had tied. Imagine January 6th in that situation. So 44,000 votes, the narrowest of margins, changed the fate of our country and the last 4 years of our life. Goodness. Okay, so that's the first 44. Second 44. White women are the largest voting bloc nationally and in our key battleground states. In fact, white women make up 44% of the vote share across the Rust Belt where we root our work. If you're newer to Galvanize, you might be thinking, why is she talking about white ladies? And the reason is because white women have disproportionate power to influence the future of our electoral college and the fate of our elections. If we want to build a broader multiracial coalition to protect our democracy and make sure we elect candidates who will advance progress in these battleground states, we need to get more people to join us, right? And white women, partially because they make up the biggest share of voters in these states, also make up the bulk of the voters who are not yet entrenched in their views. So our allies are working to mobilize the base and persuade and turn out voters of color in these states. And that's critical work, which we support and adore them for. For us, we're filling a critical gap in the movement by focusing on moderate women, millions of whom are open to our message of hope, who respond when we connect with them on their values, and who share our vision for a country that will work better for every single one of us, including them. So, how many moderate white women have we found nationwide? You guessed it, 44 million moderate white women. Through our unique combination of data science, neuroscience, and behavioral psychology, we have identified 44 million moderate white women across the country who we know we can move to join us. And we don't have to reach all of them. We just have to reach a fraction of them over the next year to help secure a victory and protect our democracy. Because remember, only 44,000 votes was the difference in 2020, right? So tiny fraction. All right. So that's your 44. Remember that number. And I'm really, really grateful that you decided to join us today. We're all here because we know how critical the 2024 election is going to be. We're once again standing at the precipice of what we're going to say is the most important election of our life. Our rights are being stripped away. Equity is under attack. Our democracy is in grave risk, and we're seeing rising authoritarianism globally and in this country. With the conflict in the Middle East, even a third world war is not out of the question. So this is a very serious moment, and this next election is going to matter a lot. A year out from that election, it looks like it's shaping up to be a rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And after being presented with significant evidence about who these two characters are and what they stand for, as it stands today in national polling, the two are neck and neck. And that's even tighter in some swing state polling. Now, it's a year out. And so those kind of horse race polls don't tell us where things are going to stand in a year, but they are cause for worry and concern. And what it tells us is it creates real urgency for us to understand how are voters making sense of this moment, how do they feel about the candidates, and what matters most to them. And that's why I'm just so delighted to welcome my friend and the Galvanize Advisory Committee member, Margie Omero, to join us today. If you've read the Times and seen the little cartoon images of voters describing how they feel about things and wish you could go deeper and learn more and understand more about what's going on with those voters, today is your lucky day. Margie is a principal at GBAO and the moderator for the New York Times America in Focus series. You may recognize her from cable TV shows because she works as a pundit, and she received the 2022 award for Pollster of the Year. GBAO did. So I'm bringing you only the highest quality experts today. So Margie, thank you so much for joining us today to give us a behind the scenes look into the election landscape and how things are shaping up. Please join me, everybody, in welcoming Margie.
Thank you, Jackie. Hi, everybody.
Before we dig in with Margie, I want to do a quick poll because I want to see, before we find out about other voters, how do you all feel about the election? So you can either click the link in the chat or use this little QR code with your phone. But go ahead right now. This is going to be anonymous. No one, including me, will know how you voted. But let's see how you're feeling about the 2024 election. Okay, this is our word cloud. Uh-oh. Ooh, for folks who are listening to this later while they're like walking their dog, here's some words I'm seeing. Anxious, terrified, scared, nervous, horribly concerned. Ooh, thinking about leaving the country, skittish. Oy, oy, oy. Frightened, unsure. I got a little hope. I see a Biden, see some despair. Okay, so I'm glad you're here. And I'm really glad, if you didn't put your name in the chat yet and say where you're from, you need some community. So come on in, because what we're going to do is take a hard look at what's going on. And then I promise you, you will leave here with hope and a path out of this darkness, because we know what to do. Okay, so there's a few more seconds left to respond. I'm going to put mine in there. Hopeful is mine. So let's start with the reality check, though, with Margie. Okay, Margie, tell us a little bit about what you are seing with these folks. How are they making sense? How are voters making sense of the 2024 elections and the matchup, what that looks to be between Trump and Biden?
Well, first of all, thank you again. It's great. I love Galvanize. It's such important work. And hello to everybody out there. Some of you who I know quite well. So it's great to see folks. I would say there are a few things. First, I look at the same polls that everybody looks at, and like, I'm a pollster and I can tell you, ignore the polls right now. And there's obviously truth to that. We're a year out. Polls fluctuate. National polls aren't really how we decide elections. At the same time, this is a divided country, and people who identify as a Republican, who voted for Trump previously, are not evaluating him based on new information and deciding, okay, well, now I feel X because he did this recently or because of this investigation. They give themselves off ramps to decide, like, that's not important to me right now. I voted for him and I'm going to continue to vote for him in the future. There's also a lot of processing about the economy that people are doing that is quite real, that we should talk about. At the same time, I feel nonetheless, optimistic in Trump's ability to galvanize and consolidate people who are opposed to him. That the views against him are really very intense and very strong. And, you know, while his, you know, is he able to convert the intensity of the folks who were with him now, who have some other Republicans that they've been flirting with? He's not kind of gaining new, you know, new super fans. He's holding on to super fans, but is he attracting new super fans when those folks are now kind of shopping around a little bit to other candidates? But the people who are really strongly against, and we were talking to kind of left Democratic leaning voters, and this one woman says, you know, look, I would vote for a dog. I would vote for any dog over Trump. Let me be absolutely clear. And then the backroom viewers were like, you know, joking about which dog did they think would do, you know, which dog they like this, you know, a strong candidate, as because of the fun of saying like they would vote for a dog over Trump. So there's really oh, are people having sound issues? Hopefully not. That was the first comment. But so I would say that the intensity of opposition to Trump is very strong. And you have a list of accomplishments from the Biden administration that people support, even if they view it through the lens of partisanship. As the campaign ramps up and people are hearing, you know, being communicated with about the different components of the Biden administration and their accomplishments, I think people are going to, you know, feel differently in terms of where the country's going and what's been happening in the administration.
Okay, we're having a tiny bit of an issue with your sound, Margie. You're going in and out, but let's just move through it. Talk a little bit about, you know, I'll just say that our own research recently kind of validates exactly what you're saying. And one of the things we're definitely seeing is people are having a lesser of two evils kind of conversation in our research. Tell us about the role of candidates other than Trump. Are folks only thinking about Biden and Trump? What are they thinking about independents or challengers to Biden? How is that showing up?
There was a poll that came out last night where RFK was getting 22% of the vote, and people were, you know, responding really strongly to that, getting a plurality of the votes among independents. I think the conventional wisdom that, you know, those other candidates really actually help President Biden and hurt Trump. I mean, if you look at I looked, you know, this morning at the crosstabs from that public poll, RFK is much more popular with Republicans than he is among Democrats, and a lot of voters aren't sure who he is. So I think there are folks out there who are saying, you know, who are maybe third party curious, but ultimately will come home to the party where they identify. And independents are not all kind of you know, cut from the same cloth. There are independents who lean Republican. There are independents who really come kind of you know, each election is sort of a blank, you know, as a blank page. And as they, you know, learn more about RFK, if he kind of makes it that far and gets on the ballot and all the things that one must do to kind of get to that point, are going to, you know, decide that he's not for them. The folks who are interested in him right now are Republicans, which I think, you know, makes me kind of less concerned about what the threat would be.
And what about the other folks, Nikki Haley, DeSantis? How are voters feeling about them vis-a-vis Trump?
Yeah, I mean, you know, right now, those candidates don't seem to be catching enough fire to be able to emerge from the primary. Now, primaries are volatile and can change very, very quickly. And so who's to say what will happen in the Republican primary? That's a completely different process than the way Democratic primaries have worked in terms of how they, you know, kind of run their operation. DeSantis doesn't seem to be surging. He seems to be only receding. He hasn't been able to become an alternative to Trump for more moderate Republicans, and he hasn't been able to siphon off Trump fans who don't find him a better alternative than Trump himself. So he hasn't been able to get. Plus, he's kind of has seemingly operational problems of running a campaign in a way where he would be effective. So you see all of that making him kind of not not really catching fire. Nikki Haley's surge, it seems to be real. And it's just a question of, will Republican primary voters turn out for her? Again, I don't know. I mean, other candidates have really flamed out pretty spectacularly. I mean, the fact that the vice president had to end his campaign this past weekend. Vivek Ramaswamy, people became immediately interested and then immediately turned off from him. We saw this. We did a dial group during the first Republican primary debate. So we had people in Milwaukee, so the city where the debate was, and people, not where the debate was, but in the city where the debate was, and we recruited them and we forced them to watch the debate. And then afterwards, we saw people kind of turn as the debate was happening against Ramaswamy. We saw them like kind of groan as he, started to talk about the way he talked about climate change and the way, talked about women all getting a check. Like you could just feel the energy. They weren't even talking, but you could feel the energy turn against him, and people decided they did not like him by the end. So that's very much how Republican primary voters are acting. They liked him at first and decided they don't like him. They find him unlikable. So I don't think that really, leads a lot of room for, there aren't a lot of other places where Republican primary voters are going to go. Chris Christie, may be, giving the clearest voice to the Trump is having legal problems. Like, we should not have a candidate who has legal problems. He's giving that a very clear and articulate airing and discussion. But that's not where Republican primary voters are. Like, if they're showing up to a Republican primary, they may not be election deniers, but they feel that Trump is unfairly attacked, and they don't really, are open to giving off ramps to explain why they support him for the most part. There aren't enough Republican primary voters left who consider themselves more centrist. Those folks don't vote in primaries or are leaving the party, or they just won't vote in a primary. They may vote reluctantly in a general, but they're not going to turn out and vote for in a primary most likely. So we did in the focus groups we did last night, we did a group with Republicans, and we talked about things like January 6th, and we showed some video, and we gave people some backstory for folks who, weren't sure. People said, well, it's only just like a handful of people who went into the Capitol, and, you can't really believe what you see on the internet. Like, well, my vote, it was counted. I know my vote was counted. So like, I'm not really concerned about this. Like, it was just, people were giving a variety of different explanations to say, this ultimately is not going to change my vote. I know Trump enabled, some of the rioters, but ultimately that's not going to impact my vote. So with some of the, Republican voting base, they're going to stay with him. And the new information, while important, is not ultimately going to change his hardcore base.
So let's talk a little bit about which segments of the voters you think it's most important to focus on. That's a question we get a lot, like who matters most as we're trying to think about which elements of the electorate to focus on. What's your answer when you get asked that, and who are you most worried about? What makes you feel most hopeful?
Yeah, everybody's important, and we shouldn't, I know there's a lot of I know, as Democrats, we like to worry, and I think that worrying is good. I think it's good to worry. It's important to worry. The stakes are very high. And so it makes sense for people to worry. I don't think anybody is taking any group for granted. I don't think anybody's dismissing a group as unreachable and so not worth spending resources on. I think that's why Galvanize's role in the ecosystem is so important, because, all these different groups are important and make the difference. And so, whether that means younger voters and making sure younger voters know what the stakes are and feel enthusiastic about, turning out, and whether that's abortion or LGBT rights or something else, that's, an important piece of the puzzle. Voters of color are not a monolithic group. Hispanic men vote differently than Hispanic women. All these issues are, they all, their roles for, reaching out different audiences and with different messages. White women and moderate white women have other issues. They talk about caregiving and they talk about education in schools or crime or gun violence. It's something that I hear routinely in focus groups. So a couple weeks ago, and we'll be releasing them soon, we did focus groups for AARP with women over 50, a variety of different backgrounds of women over 50. And in the caregiving group, it was, I mean, they were really heart-wrenching because, you know, we recruited them to be women who were in the middle of like serious caregiving responsibilities, like a certain number of hours for a parent or spouse or an adult child. And this one woman, between the time we had recruited her and the time of the group, her mom that she had been providing care for had passed away. And she just kind of burst into, you know, into sobs right in the middle of the group. And not only was the whole group, you know, welcoming and providing her comfort and sending the helpful messages and giving her ideas of things she could do, you know, in the community to give back to other people who didn't have caregivers. And it was so striking to me, not just that the role of caregiving in these women's lives, and it's such a big portion of the electorate, but also how much it impacted their financial situation and their emotional situation and their emotional happiness, where people were saying, I had to quit my job, I had a career, I thought I was going to have the TV version of retirement where you're in the convertible and, you know, you're flying down the highway and there's money coming out of the trunk, but now I had to give all that up. And I don't get paid, you know, I don't get paid for this. Like, I've had to sell my car, I've had to sell my house. So these kinds of things that people feel alone and isolated by are very important. And so we hear that whether it's caregiving for seniors or student loans that come up all the time with more younger voters and with voters of color. These are the kinds of issues that, you know, Democrats have the natural advantage on. Republicans don't, you know, don't have strong messaging on this. That's why they, you know, overplay their hand and focus on sort of these cultural right-wing extremist attacks because they don't have answers to these kinds of questions.
So I hear in that, like, you've kind of moved into like, what are the issues you're hearing from your voters? And so one of them is certainly the economic strain, caregiving, student loans. Is there another, how is reproductive freedom coming up? And then let's talk a little bit about the culture wars and how you see this coming up. So how is reproductive freedom coming up?
It comes up. I mean, it comes up a lot. It comes up, really, it doesn't matter the age of the group. And it even, you know, it doesn't always come up with men, but it even comes up with men. And so we've done, as you can imagine, many, many focus groups over the last, you know, 2 years that have had a portion of the group where we're talking about abortion post-Dobbs. We worked for Governor Evers in Wisconsin. We were part of the team that worked with on behalf of Janet Protasiewicz at the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. And we would have people, you know, I'd have people cry in focus groups all the time talking about abortion. And even if the focus group was not about, it was just really just a little component of the focus group. And I am where they would talk about, like, they had to drive a friend to another state, or a guy who would say, like, you know, my wife is high risk and we are thinking, you know, we want to have a second kid and we're thinking maybe we should move because abortion is not legal here. And so we'd hear this all over the country. It was so, you know, there was one time where somebody was talking about her own miscarriage that I had to kind of stop the group so everybody could kind of pause and help this woman for whom it was so raw. And that is still going on. Like, that's, you know, that is still going on. So I think there's this conventional wisdom with Republicans or the press, like, oh, that's 22's issue and now we're talking about X. Like, that's not the reality that of people's lived experiences, because they are still driving their, you know, friend to another state or advising their daughter or son about where to go to college or what have you. So I do think we, you know, there's some work to be done in terms of how we talk about a national ban, or, you know, what happens if you live in a state where there are abortion protections. How do you feel about a state that doesn't have those abortion protections? Do you feel like that's important, where other states are? So I think there are some conversations that are evolving, but, you know, we have the kind of like consensus position, and the other side is part they support a total ban on abortion. They support a ban on abortion, and they may try to wordsmith it however they like. That's what they end up having. That's what they support.
That's amazing. Okay, I'm keeping my eye on the clock. So what I'm gonna do is pause us here for a moment, Margie.
Yeah.
And I want to just mention that everything that Margie is saying is 100% validated in the research that we're doing here at Galvanize. We actually just got back some new research. It's hot off the presses that shows that white women voters, well, while voters overall are split evenly between Trump and Biden nationally, what we're seeing is white women voters are once again leaning towards Trump. They're a little bit more, like 39-36 in favor of Trump. That is not a lot of surprise to us. It's the same thing we saw in 2016. It's the same thing we saw in 2020. So we're anticipating that we're going to see that movement in 2024 nationally. And what it says to me is it's why it matters so much that we're doing this work, because where we worked in 2020 and 2022, as you'll see, even though nationally white women were going for Trump, we were able to buck that trend and move moderate white women to the left. So these new polls that we're seeing raise that concern again, and really emphasize how important it is that we're, as Margie said, that this is one of the elements of the work that's happening on the progressive movement. I'm going to ask you, Margie, to hang with us for a minute. Folks, if you have questions for Margie, you can jot them down for yourself. We're going to come back in just a few minutes for a Q&A. Before we do that, though, I want to bring us back to those 44 million white women nationwide who have this disproportionate influence over the presidential election and who we are starting to see lean towards Trump. Okay, so when we look at those 44 million women, our success lies in our ability to really understand them, to get to know them, and to connect with them in a meaningful way. Even though they're all moderate, they are not monolithic. So this slide you've seen before. In order to figure out where to most strategically use our time and energy and how to best connect with and move folks, we use a combination of data science, neuroscience, and behavioral psychology. The data science we use is to identify the traits that are most highly correlated with white women's political behavior. We then sort women in groups based on those common traits and values. We take the folks at the edges off because they're entrenched in their views and they're not movable. And then we look at the women in the three middle segments. We identify them based on, they have a voter-based ID. We know exactly who they are, what their address is, where they live, what shows they watch, what their values are, right? So we really get to know them. And those are the women who, through our research, we're able to identify are open to shifting their perspectives and opinions if we're able to connect with them on their values and really meet them about what it matters most to them, what are the issues that are most concerning to them, and take their motivations and barriers into account. So on the next slide, you'll see, as a complement to what Margie just showed us, this is a recent survey we just did with our political action committee, the One for All committee. This is a new survey we just got back, which showed when we asked white women and nationally what matters most to you, you'll see on this slide on the left, economy is always by far and away the #1 issue. So 4 out of 10 white women nationally picked economy as their #1 issue. When we asked them qualitative data to figure out, like, why is that true? What they said is people have to survive before they can worry about any other problems, and people are struggling. And so economy is a huge issue for folks. And it's not only the economy, and I want to just emphasize that. So we will always talk to folks about the economy, because if it's not their first issue, it's probably their second or third. We need to think about two things. One, it's not the only issue that matters. And when you do talk to folks about the economy, you have to understand the nuance at play for them. As Margie said, for a lot of our women, when they think about the economy, they're thinking about caregiving and both the cost of that and the implications for their career and their income, right? So care is a gendered way into economy, right? So I want to emphasize on the first point, it's not the only issue that matters. 6 out of 10 women pick something else as their top issue, right? So we really, as we're doing this work, have to look at what else are they saying they're worried about, whether it's abortion or healthcare or preserving democracy or immigration. Like, what are they saying is the number one issue for them? And then how can we talk to them about those issues? Abortion is a key issue for many women, but not the top issue for most. And so it's really interesting to watch how that plays out. People will say economy and abortion, right? For independent women, young voters, and suburban voters, if they don't choose economy as their top issue, they choose abortion next. So that's really interesting. So as Margie says, it's a live issue. It's coming back. It's going to be here in 2024 as well. I want you to note in the slide on the right-hand side, you can see this little spike in a teal bar under democracy. That to me was really interesting as an outlier, because what we're seeing is there's a segment of older white women for whom they're very concerned about what's happening to this country, about how people are being cruel to each other. We've lost like the sort of the village, the feeling of being neighborly, and they're worried about the future of our democracy. So for them, they might be super pro-choice, but maybe they're going to be more compelled by what they think will protect the democracy. So we have to really do the work to tailor our messages to the specific audience about what's most pressing for them and how do we talk to them about it. That's why you'll see in our ads, we really are working in 3 different categories: economy and culture wars, economy, culture wars, and then democracy. Let's move then to this next slide. Oh, thanks, Allie. Allie's handling the slides today. So this is an example of a care economy ad. Galvanize is working on a number of ads, and we're actually running these ads to voters now, long before all the noise of the election comes in. We're talking to them about the issues that are pressing on them, helping them to shape their perspective and their position. What do they expect from their government and from candidates in general? And as we heard from Margie, the economy is super important, and caregiving in particular is important. We see that people generally support caregiving, but we're having a little trouble getting them motivated to defend it and insist upon it, right? And so we're getting to really look into that. And what you're going to see is an example of an ad that dramatically builds support for childcare in America by talking to really using the voters' frame. How are they approaching the issue as a little bit more conservative or fiscally conservative folks? So let's watch that ad and we can talk about it.
It makes a lot of sense to be conservative when it comes to spending, and our government could definitely use a lesson in that sometimes. But don't cut corners when it comes to early childhood education and childcare. We're the richest country in the world. We can afford to give all kids a good start in life, and that means quality, affordable childcare and early education for all children, no matter their parents' income. That's the best investment we could make.
Great. So that's a little bit different than what you might see from some of our friends, right? But what we're doing there is meeting the women where they are. They feel worried about government spending. They don't necessarily think things are working out for them very well. And so we have a little bit lower trust in government, and we have a little sense of like, is this going to work out for me, or is it a good use of money, right? So we're allowing them to feel that way, but then moving them into leave no child behind, use compassion, this, and what we must do is take care of our children, so using a caregiving lens there. What that does is move independents 11 percentage points. It moves suburban voters 12 percentage points. It moves women over 55 20 percentage points, which is really interesting because they're probably looking at their children struggling with childcare, right? Or maybe being to be a caregiver for their grandchildren. So we're seeing that really work. The other thing it did, when we asked the question, even if I wouldn't personally benefit, I would be willing to increase taxes if money goes to federally funded early childcare centers. And what we saw when we asked that question was this ad dramatically moved people. So independents, 15 percentage points, Trump conservatives, 15 percentage points, suburban voters 10. So even if they're not going to personally benefit, this helps them see it's an important thing for our country to do. So that's an example of how we take a pressing issue, economy, use a lens that women are going to be sensitive to, and address it through their worldview and value structure, and have real success about the outcome we're trying to achieve. Let's look next at an example with abortion. So as we heard, abortion is consistently a top issue. It will be a big issue again in 2024. May not be a vote driver for everybody. It is a vote driver for the progressive base, for young voters, independents. In the context of a general election, when several key issues are happening, it's critical that we build salience of this issue among our audience, so they're factoring it into their decision making, right? We want it to be economy and. We've been very successful at doing that. So in 2022, we moved women 5 percentage points to increase their support for reproductive freedom and oppose government bans. And then earlier this year in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, the PAC moved people 5.8 percentage points. So really have a lot of success at getting folks to increase their support for this issue. What I want to show you now is this ad that we created. It's running in Ohio. As you all know, next week, I think, is the Ohio, there's a reproductive freedom on the Ohio ballot. Galvanize USA is on the advisory committee for that initiative. We've been supporting folks with our research and insights. Here's an example of an ad that really works to build support for abortion in a little more conservative state, Ohio.
These new abortion policies have been absolutely terrible for women. You've got women being denied abortion medication, becoming infertile because they can't get treatment for miscarriages, and publicly shamed for aborting due to medical complications. It's just not fair. These abortion policies don't know our circumstances or our reproductive needs. We need to trust women, families, and doctors with these decisions.
So what you're seeing there, if you've watched our repro ads previously, we often do like third-party journeys. The woman isn't talking about her own experience. Maybe she's talking about how the rules are impacting others. In this case, we're using fairness and then compassion and non-judgment. So those are the values that this woman is, Karen, is referencing in her story. And what we saw with this kind of ad, when we asked voters, if after you see this ad, how do you feel about the statement, my public official should take action to ensure all women have the freedom to make their own decisions about abortion? This ad moved our under 35-year-old moderate women 14 percentage points to be more supportive of that statement. And it moved women who are conservative 9 percentage points, right? So it's because conservatives, fairness is a real value for them that they hold to, and if they think something's unfair, you can move them to get them to support you. When we asked them how they feel about this statement, any law that restricts why and when someone wants to have an abortion is unfair, which is a pretty progressive statement, right? That's a move from Dobbs. What we saw there was women aged 35 to 54 agreed with that 15 percentage points after they saw this ad. They feel upset by the unfairness and the consequences, and they become more supportive of it. I'm going to now turn us to, from a time perspective, I'm going to move us on to one more example of an ad. And this is an ad that's around what's happening with the culture war attacks on trans youth. So trans and non-binary youth, what you've, as folks living in America in the last couple of years, we've been watching as the far right is using culture wars as a desire to divide us, polarize us, create fear and threat. And that approach is very effective at moving moderate folks to the right. When you feel fear and threat, you close in and you look for someone who is strong and who will protect you, and you become less generous and less compassionate. So we're seeing that attack happening across issues. We saw it happening on building the wall in 2016. We saw an attack of critical race theory, book banning, and now we're seeing widespread attack on LGBTQ youth under the guise of parental rights. So At Galvanize, we do two things, right? We work affirmatively to move people on economy, reproductive freedom, and democracy, but we also look to inoculate against any culture wars that are effectively stoking fear and threat and that risk people moving away from us, right? So what new research shows that transgender issue are the number one concern for Republicans right now. It is not yet really working with moderate women, but we see, because it is red meat for the base, we're seeing a lot of it happen on social media and getting into women's feeds, and locally a lot of threat around parental rights, right? So we decided to address that and try to pick up how can we do what we did so successfully do around immigration, around critical race theory and book banning? How can we now look at what's happening in this context of parental rights? So here's an example of an ad with a great woman named Kathy and her child Lane. And they shot this for us to help move the needle on this issue. Let's watch that ad.
Like all moms, my job is to support and love my child. But as the mom of a non-binary kid, I can't always protect them from everything. Kids can be unkind, and our friends and neighbors might be afraid to say the wrong thing. I get it. I felt that way too at first. We might not always know the perfect words to say, but that doesn't mean we can't be kind to each other. Trans and non-binary kids deserve every chance to be happy, healthy, and do well in life.
I wish we had more time to go break apart why that ad works so well. There's permission to not get totally not to get it right. There's the American flag in the background. So there's a lot of little things in here that we've done to provide comfort and support. But what we see is it moves moderate 12 percentage points. It moves Trump voters 11 percentage points to become more supportive of welcoming and protecting all children, right? So we can talk more about that if we have time at the end. I want to quickly just touch on, so Galvanize is running all of these ads now through the next summer. We're doing this work to help shape people's perspectives and positions, again, what they expect from their government and candidates in general. As we get closer to the election, my PAC, the One for All committee, comes in. I'm saying my because it's a separate and individual entity. The lawyers like me to say my. The PAC comes in and the PAC does highly tailored messages to micro-targeted audiences to get them to vote for a specific candidate. So I want to encourage you to check out the OFAC website. You can look at all the ads we did in 2020 and 2022 and 2023 and see for yourself what we've done that has been so successful. So in 2020, you can see on this slide that this next slide, that we have, even though white women nationally didn't do what we wanted, we were able to move them towards Biden in Michigan and Wisconsin by significant margins and help secure victory there. In 22, we were able to move white women in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Ohio 8.3 percentage points in increasing their support for the Dem Senate candidates. And then earlier this year, like Margie, we were in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, and we were able to jump in and help elect Janet Protasiewicz. In that case, we also measured that was really a proxy war around abortion. We ended up measuring our success at moving people to be more supportive of reproductive freedom. And we had even greater results this year in Wisconsin than we did last year. So we moved people by 5.8 percentage points. So we have a proven track record that this approach, identify the people, understand what matters to them, their core values, message to them that way, it is a proven effective at moving them. So when we look ahead till next year, I want to just focus for today on our work in the presidential. Our tier 1 states are Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. The white number shows the audience size we have in each state, and the red piece shows what was the margin of victory in 2020, right? If we can move just a small portion of our audience in these states, we can once again help secure victory in the blue wall states. And that's our plan for 2024. And it's totally doable. The math is clear. We know how to do it. We've done it before. We just have to scale up our operation and keep going. But I'm not going to mention in depth today is the work we're also planning for Senate and House races embedded in these states and a few others. But because today I really want us to stay focused on the big picture around protecting our democracy through the presidential. So I'm going to pause us there and give us at least 10 minutes of Q&A and encourage you to ask questions to Margie. So Kelly, do you want to lead us through?
Yes, we have a lot of questions coming in. So the first one is folks are asking about some big criticisms coming in about VP Harris. Is that something that you're seeing, Margie? And Jackie, how do you counter the negativity of things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a few things. I would say that people's views on the vice president are, and that's not just true currently with the current vice president, this has always been true, that people's views on the vice president don't really determine how they're going to vote. That's rarely the case. It's something that reinforces how they feel about the top of the ticket, but that's ultimately how they make up their mind. I do feel that like an inordinate amount of attention is given to kind of this public chatter about the vice president that feels unfair. When we know that, every vice president's had this kind of similar, finding what their role is, and that whole conversation around the role of the vice president is not something that just happened on, with Vice President Harris. It's been true, for a very long time. That said, this is, I think there are opportunities that we'll see over the next year to, excite portions of the base that respond very well to Vice President Harris, who is, charismatic in person and, great at talking to folks who focused on the issues that, a lot of voters really prioritize. So I think we'll begin to see more of that as time goes on. I mean, and so but I don't hear people walk in the door in a focus group. I can't think of a time where someone walked in the door of the focus group and said that was what they wanted to talk about, as a positive or a negative, that this is, ultimately not what people are, and that's, again, any vice president since, the 25, 30 years I've been doing this.
Yeah, I would just add that it does feel to me like there is a particular gendered and racialized attack that's happening to Vice President Harris. And so in our work, because we really look at folks' internalized sexism, racial resentment, the willingness to other, a big part of what we're doing is thinking about how do we overcome those barriers and get to a place where our voters will totally embrace women for president and women of color specifically for president.
Thanks. Jackie, when you were sharing the ads, we were getting a lot of questions about how you measure success, and does movement on the issues then translate to change in vote choice?
So we measure success by, first we test the messages in the lab, then we test the ads in the lab, then we run those in the field. We do randomized control trials in the field to see if those ads actually work out in the wild. What we're looking for, as the example I gave in Wisconsin, is if we talk to them about abortion and using those reproductive freedom messages, can we increase their support for that? And that tells us how we did in terms of issues that matter to them or matter in the election. So that's a piece of it. When we run these ads, we also track so Galvanize Action might do the ad on the issue, and then OFAC, the One for All committee, is able to track how do they say they're going to vote at the outset of the campaign, and then how do they say they're going to vote, how do they say they did vote right at the time of the election. So in 2022, we asked them in May 1st, how are you thinking about voting? We kept asking over time, and then right at the election eve, we said, how did you vote? And that helps us to see what was the actual shift in their support for particular candidates. And so we actually measure that as did they actually vote, and did that change their vote choice?
Okay, thanks. We got some questions about why white women might vote for Trump. Some reference to, is it to protect privilege for their kids, especially the white sons? And then how are we addressing that moving forward?
Margie, do you want to jump in there? Or do you want me to?
Yeah, no, I'll jump in. I mean, look, I think for a lot of women, they are coming to their Republican identity and their Trump support, and they would argue that it is not through a lens of their gender. They would argue, well, I'm worried about safety, or here's something we hear in focus groups, almost in every single focus group. I didn't really like what Trump said so much, but I'll tell you what, I have more money in my wallet, or I have more money in my 401k. Almost that line exactly I hear very regularly in focus groups. And I think if you ask women, like, well, as a woman, do you feel, complicated? Do you feel any complications or challenging about supporting Trump, given what we know about his treatment of women and, bans on abortion and et cetera? And I don't think that women would say, I think women would respond to that and say, like, this is not, I don't think about it that way. I think about, the economy, or whether I feel safe, or whether I feel the country is going in the right direction. And so I think, the excusing of his behavior that women give is not that different from what men give who support him, which is like, I'm just gonna, I'm going to allow it because I support him because of these other things. Now, that those other things may be different for different people. Some people, they really worry about immigration or the border. And for other people, it may be, they may feel threat of crime in their communities, or taxes, or something we hear about, not just from right-leaning voters, but disproportionately, is this worry about, like, respect, and are young people treating each other and their elders with respect, and are sort of society today becoming coarser and less. And I know it seems at odds with Trump to worry about that and then support Trump. I'm aware that doesn't sound like those things go together, but there is something about kind of the strong, like, as that people feel like that's something that that they would like to see more of. And so it's something that we hear a lot. In fact, it manifests itself sometimes with people tell us a lot that they worry about driving. Even people who people are ruder on the streets when they're driving. They're ruder as drivers than they used to be. That's something that I don't know if that's something that can be fact checked. I wouldn't know how to fact check that, but it's something that we hear pretty regularly as the symbol of, like, you can't even trust strangers on the road.
So what I'd add to that is, when we did an analysis of white women's voting behavior in 2022, what we saw was their economic anxiety alone was not highly correlated with or predictive of their vote choice. When it was their economic anxiety combined with feelings of grievance or resentment, that's when we saw it pop in terms of that would predict how they voted. So that, what does that mean to folks? For a lot of right-leaning folks, they feel like they don't matter anymore, that they're not who people care about, that the left isn't interested in them, that they're not, when Hillary said stronger together, she didn't mean them. So there's a feeling of being left behind and maybe not included in the vision that Democrats have. I think that shows up as, I'm not only upset that I'm not doing well, but I'm upset that affirmative action is helping somebody else do better. Like, I'm trying to fill the roles. Why is someone else getting a leg up, right? So if you don't have a very strong systemic analysis and you feel like, look, I'm doing everything I can, why is someone else getting a benefit? That turns into resentment, to grievance, and that is being fed by the far right. And we see that is really what all the culture wars are doing, right? Fear, threat, grievance. So part of our success is by helping to connect with folks, see them, make them feel cared about, and then invite them to join us as part of a multiracial, durable coalition that says, we do care about you, and we need you to care about everyone else too. And when we do that together, we can protect our democracy and make things better for everybody. And what we find is there's a really decent number of women who, when we're connecting with them in that way and they feel seen and heard, they will come with us. They do have similar desires for America, and they are worried about some of these same things around climate, around guns. And so we're able to connect with them as long as they feel like we want them to. So that is a piece of our work there.
Just one quick
Let me-
thing. I have one quick thought on that, and then we can move on to another question. Is when we tested support for the child tax credit, when that was expanded, saying it's a tax break for most families with children worked better than reducing child poverty by half, because then everyone felt like, oh, if it's most families with children, that includes me or families like me. And if you say it reduces child poverty by half, that sounds like that's somebody else.
Right. That feeling of being part of this is for me too, or people like me too. And that is a challenge that we're seeing in their, folks are being fed a story that the woke left doesn't care about them and wants to cancel them and isn't interested in them. And so part of our work is to say, that's not who we are on the left. We actually want America to work better for everybody. I'm like, we could do maybe one tiny quick question and then we got to close up soon, even though I could go for another hour.
Maybe let's just have the last one be, where are you feeling any hope moving forward?
Margie.
I feel hope when I talk to people, well, when I talk to young people, like that for sure is inspiring. And to hear them, think about climate change and taking action and trying to learn more and, using their voice, all those things I think are very inspiring and exciting. And I do feel, and it's going to sound odd to say I feel hope from this, but one thing we can count on them is to overplay their hand and be overly divisive. And it's a way, and people reject it. Like they do it every cycle, and every cycle people say, oh no, look, the right is talking about immigration or the caravan or what, Sharia law. They have a different version of it every cycle. And in good cycles, for us, it doesn't work. In bad cycles for us, people say it worked, but they use it every cycle. And but the last cycle, it was truly rejected. Democrats said, and swing voters said, like, we need to move forward. We're too divided. And that language that comes from the right, which they'll continue to do, that's what they have, reminds people of how we got to this place. And voters are really saying, we have to, this is where we're headed right now. We can't go on like this, where we're this divided. And the fact that the right is going to continue to double down on that is a sign of where voters are going to say, like, I've just had enough.
Yeah, I would just add to that from my perspective, over the last 5 years, what we found is when we approach moderate women with to be inclusive and supportive of them, when we do pause, when I pause my own othering or judgment and really try to understand and connect, it's wonderful to see how people want to be seen. Folks are lonely. They feel they want to be included. They want to feel like they are part of the team. Once we are able to connect with them and make them see that we do mean them too, there truly are millions of women who are like, oh, I want to be part of this. That's a better option. I like what you're offering me. I prefer hope and belonging and togetherness to fear and threat. And so it's hard work sometimes, but the hope I get is that when we do it, we see the change, and that's exciting. So I'm going to end today by saying I see so many great questions in the chat. I wish I had all day to go through the data and the research and how we break it apart. I hope if you're new to us, I hope you will come back in the future and we'll do many, many more deep dives into our research and understanding. For today, I want to say it matters so much to us that you showed up. Our democracy is not going to save itself. So the first step was coming today. But what we do now is critical. We need to be talking to voters right now to help them make sense of the world, to push back against the hate and the division they're being fed on a daily basis, and to share these ads that are proven effective with them now. So if you have not given yet this year or not renewed, please don't wait until next year. Please help us right now. Remember those 44,000 voters? We could, if we raised $100,000, $105,000 today, we could reach 44,000 voters with weeks of messaging on the issue that matters most to them right now. And Roberta has given us a $25K match. If we meet her match, we'd be halfway there, right? So let's try together to raise that 100,000 plus today by giving what you can now. Well, let's definitely hit Roberta's match at 25K. And I'll just want to end by saying I was in the Bay Area 2 weeks ago, and one of our donors said, ask the people in the room to just pause and to remember how we felt the day after Trump won in 2020, right? I'm sorry, in 2016, and how terrible that feeling was. And she said, what would you give now if you could avoid feeling that way? Right? So what's the price of that to you? So I want to ask you, dig deep today, stay with us next year. It matters that we're in this together. We have hope. We have shined a light on the path, and we know where to go and who to bring with us, but we can't do it without you. So please do give today and come back to us if you're we're going to have our next call with another highly esteemed advisory committee member. Celinda Lake will be joining us in Q1 of next year. We'll send out a save the date for that. And I want to end by really thanking Margie for being an advisory committee for Galvanize, for being with us all these years, the last 5 years that we've learned and started this thing together, and for being such an amazing force in the world. I deeply appreciate you, Margie.
Oh, back at you, Jackie. And thank you, everybody. And thanks for the great questions. You can find me. Yeah, I'm easy to reach. People have other questions.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you coming. Bye-bye.